Hey, how's everyone doing today? Um, this is our chance to talk a little bit about the Odyssey and Book 19. Oh my goodness gracious, what a book! This is one of my favorite parts. I know that some of you will be, wanting the action sequence to unfold, and it's very exciting when it does. But to me, this particular book has a lot of suspense and a lot of emotional stakes, and I just love Penelope so much as a character. And this, I feel like she starts to really kind of appear more clearly. She kind of pops at this point, and it's exciting for me. And even more so, the connection between the two of them starts to kind of be revealed as the poet undertakes to show us a little bit more of what's behind the curtain, what the true kind of intimate details of these two characters and their connection with one another. So the book begins, with it's kind of quieting down in the hall, right? Kind of darkening, and the light is becoming lower, and Odysseus is getting Telemachus to hide the weapons. Athena's presence is indicated, right? And I think by this we're in part meant to sort of feel the intensity of the moment, right? And the anticipation. And much of this book really is about anticipation, both of the coming battle, right? But also of, the intimate reunion between Penelope and Odysseus, which is starting to become clear, forms the sort of emotional core of the story. Right? So Athena's presence, I think we could say, and the fact that she is a female god, right, is in part sort of indicating the power and significance and importance of Penelope to this story. Um, so yes, it's the Odyssey. Yes, Odysseus is the great hero, but Penelope's presence, cannot be uh, overestimated, really, in terms of her significance and how she becomes really central to the narrative and to all the sort of like feelings that are kind of, rushing up inside these characters. Everyone's in their feelings right now. And I do feel that Athena's, her sort of like illuminating the hall as they're hiding the weapons is like a little bit about her kind of illuminating Penelope, right? Penelope is going to appear, right? And in the next sequence, she appears described, in relation to goddesses, and Athena's presence there just sort of serves to underline that queenly kind of goddess-like energy that Penelope is bringing into the hall as she moves onto her chair, and in the beginning it's this Melantho character, right? The sort of the bad maid, who is like, harshly castigated for her bad behavior, right? Which is kind of a little bit satisfying. And then, the story kind of coalesces, and you can feel Penelope's authority, right? Her dignity, and her power, as she sort of indicates a seat next to her and kind of like draws Odysseus closer to herself. A very kind of queenly action, that as a reader, as an audience member of the story, we're meant to sort of admire her, right? And yes, and to respect her right away. That's the kind of vibe that she's putting out, right? And the story then emphasizes how both characters, both Penelope and Odysseus, as the rest of the world falls away, and the story really then is just about the two of them, right? It's this moment of intense intimacy when it's as if the rest of the world doesn't exist, and only the two of them, and their connection is kind of what matters. They become sort of a universe of two. And there's this moment early on before they begin their kind of intellectual jousting in their conversation, when the story describes them both as this sort of patient, right, and letting this anticipation of their connection kind of build, um, and and yeah, so we know that part of what makes this poem really important is its sort of sense of the power of the mind, right? Odysseus, as its main character, is a trickster. He's a deceiver. He's many things, but all of them, all these great characteristics, a lot of them are mental, right? So yes, he has a heroic build and all this kind of stuff, but what the poem seems to be really interested in is his mind, and it's also interested in Penelope's mind, right? So she is kind of questioning him, right? Almost interrogating him, and there's a great sort of scholar of love who describes love, intimate love, as interrogation, right? As wanting to know so much about someone else that you need to kind of uncover their secrets, that you're driven to sort of delve into their inner depths, right? And uncover what kind of makes them tick. And it's clear that that's the dynamic that we're seeing here between Odysseus and Penelope, right? And in some ways, he is the one being pursued. So it actually inverts a classic male-female power dynamic in which women are the pursued and men are the pursuers. And indeed, it makes Odysseus the pursued. He is the gentle fawn, if you will, of being kind of chased across the field by Penelope the huntress, right? And in so doing, the way that they are dancing with one another is through storytelling. So she demands to hear the story of his background, right, as a way of like, as if she's a little suspicious about who this stranger is, right, about who this handsome beggar it might be. And so, again, we can see that the story, the poem, is celebrating storytelling as this kind of powerful medium for connection and intimacy, right? That telling someone a story is in some ways one of the most intimate acts that you can do, right? Where you really kind of pull out their imagination and build a world for them to become entranced by, right? And to be lost within. So, Odysseus, no stranger to playing on someone's sympathies, calls himself a man of sorrow, right? Like and we wonder at this point, is the poem kind of setting the stage for the fact that, Odysseus is going to have to feel sorry for some of what he has done, right? He is going to have to make amends on some level. And that means genuinely feeling grief, right, for his actions. Otherwise, it just will not work. Their reunion won't function. She won't feel sort of released from the burden of resentment, right, for having been abandoned. So he has to suffer in order to be redeemed in her eyes, right, and very specifically in her eyes. So in this sense, the story then is placing us in Penelope's perspective here. We also think that Odysseus really should suffer for what he has caused others to suffer for, right? And ever the sort of like socially intelligent man, he recognizes this, and starts off by talking about how grief is sort of ever present, and it's really emotional suffering and pain is something that he's really going through, right? And then Penelope tells him her story of weaving the funeral shroud, right? And again, this is a great metaphor for storytelling itself, right? Weaving different strands together, using the creation of this, fanciful shroud to entrance these kind of menacing figures. So, like in the Arabian Nights, where the Princess Scheherazade tells these stories to the Sultan to prevent her from being beheaded, right? In this case, if you make the weaving of the shroud a metaphor for storytelling, it's as if Penelope's capacity to tell stories is saving her marriage and her life, right? And so she begins by telling Odysseus this and sharing, right, this very intimate detail, which of course, were he to tell it to any of the suitors, would result in, something catastrophic happening. So right away, she is indicating that she trusts him, right, with this information. Yeah, so let's come back to the next few pages in a moment. Thanks.